Take a deep breath, and let it out slowly. Wherever you are, let your body begin to soften. Let the burdens of the day melt away, like soft sand slipping through your fingers. The night is here, not loud or demanding, but calm and tender, wrapping you gently in its quiet embrace. Everything around you is exactly as it should be. There is no rush, no hurry, just this moment. Just you and me. I am here not to instruct, nor to disturb, but simply to tell you a story. A story born in the quiet places, where the world slows down, and dreams begin to stir. From a distant, forgotten land, comes the tale of a king who lost something simple, yet precious. He forgot how to sleep. But before we dive into his story, let us do nothing at all. Just breathe. Inhale softly. Exhale slowly. Feel the gentle weight of night settling around you, like an ancient lullaby softly remembered. Are you ready? Then come. Step quietly with me into the stillness. Let us begin. Once upon a time, far beyond the whispering rivers and silent mountains, there lay a kingdom draped in stillness. It was a place where time did not march forward, but rather breathed softly, like a sigh carried on the wind. Here, stone towers rose not to command the sky, but to listen to the quiet song of dusk. The sunlight filtered gently, as if afraid to disturb the calm. And the air itself seemed slow, wrapping the land in a gentle hush. No one knew the kingdom's name, for the world beyond had long forgotten it, as if it had slipped between moments, hidden in the spaces where sound fades and dreams begin. Some said its walls were made from silence itself, and that its streets were paved with the soft dust of forgotten memories. In the heart of this stillness lived a king, a man whose beard was long enough to catch the seasons like falling leaves, and whose eyes held stories older than the language of birds. People said he had ruled for centuries, yet his voice had grown quieter over the years, until it was almost a breath. Not because he lacked power, but because something deeper had begun to unravel inside him. The king had once been a man who laughed freely, who dreamed with open eyes and a heart full of stars. But long ago, in a moment lost to all but the wind, he had chosen a different path. He had turned his back on sleep, banished it like an unwelcome guest who whispered of rest and surrender. He declared, "Let others dream, but I will keep my eyes open to the night." And so, sleep slipped away from the kingdom. It folded its wings and left quietly, leaving the king alone with a mind that never rested. At first, this waking was a gift. Time stretched endlessly before him like an open road at dawn. His thoughts became sharp and clear, his will unyielding. He penned poems in languages no one spoke, shaped laws that would last beyond centuries, and studied the stars as though to capture their light forever. His advisors watched with awe, then with worry, then in silence. For as the nights turned into months, and the months into unbroken years, the king began to fade, not in body, but in spirit. His voice, once warm and commanding, grew fragile and faint. His eyes, once bright with wonder, now saw only shadows where light once danced. He stopped laughing. He stopped dreaming. How could one dream without closing the eyes to the world? The stars, once friends in the night, became strangers. Their gentle gleam no longer called to him. Time itself became a mirror, cold, unyielding, a reflection that refused to show his face. Yet, beneath the surface of this endless waking, something fragile and unseen stirred. In the silent corners of the kingdom, whispers of a forgotten song began to echo. The trees murmured soft lullabies. The wind, once hurried, slowed to a tender breeze, carrying the scent of jasmine and rain. One evening, as twilight folded its deep blue cloak over the land, the king found himself walking alone beneath the ancient olive tree in his courtyard. The tree, gnarled and wise, stood like a guardian of memories. Its leaves shimmered softly in the dim light, casting dancing shadows upon the stone. He reached out to touch its rough bark, feeling a pulse beneath his fingertips, not of wood, but of something alive, ancient, and true. For the first time in years, the king felt a quiet stirring within him, a fragile hope, like a bud waiting to bloom. He sat beneath the tree, closing his eyes for a single moment. It was a moment unlike any other, not a surrender to sleep, but a gentle opening to something deeper. He did not dream, but he remembered the softness of rest, the weight of stillness, the grace of silence. As he breathed slowly, the world around him seemed to pause, listening. The night embraced him, not as a conqueror, but as a friend. And in that sacred stillness, the kingdom began to breathe with him once more. The palace had many rooms. But the king now walked only one hallway, the one that faced the moon. Each night, he stood alone, draped in soft robes, silent as his shadow. And though his eyes remained open, he no longer saw the world as it was. There was a night, neither colder nor quieter than the others, but different. The moon hung lower than usual, not like a watcher, but like a whisper leaning in. The king stood still, his hands clasped behind his back, the silver glow brushing the stone floor. And then, it came. Not a sound, but a sensation, a tremble in the air. Like a lullaby hummed across time. Faint, ancient, familiar. The king tilted his head. The wind did not move. The trees outside did not sway. But the sound was there. A voice, not with words, but with memory. Something, or someone, was singing. A lullaby without language. A melody without origin. Yet it stirred something in him. Not the mind, but something deeper. He closed his eyes for the briefest moment. A breath. Not out of sleepiness, but longing. He turned away from the window that night. For the first time in years, he didn't return to the war maps, or the books he no longer truly read. Instead, he followed the sound. It led him. Not outward, but inward. He walked barefoot through the quiet palace. His feet knew the stone, they had memorized it across countless sleepless nights. But this night, it felt new. The corridors no longer echoed his footsteps. They embraced them. The air was still, but full. Like a room waiting to be remembered. He came upon the chamber of the old bells. A forgotten hall, used in ancient times for rituals of silence. The bells hadn't rung in decades. They weren't meant to. Their sound was sacred, only released in the presence of truth. And yet, one of them moved. A single bell, the smallest, hung from a thread of silver. It swayed gently, without wind. The king stood before it. He did not reach for it. He simply listened. Inside that sound, he heard footsteps of a boy chasing fireflies. He heard laughter around a bread-filled table. He heard his mother singing that same melody from the moon, the same rhythm that once wrapped him in warmth. When sleep came like a tide over sand, he didn't cry. Tears would have broken the spell. He simply stood, as the song carried him. Not to slumber, but to softness. In the stillness of that chamber, the king remembered what had been lost. Not power, not time, but surrender. The surrender of closing one's eyes, and trusting the darkness to hold you. of knowing that the world will continue breathing, even while you do not watch. He didn't sleep. Not yet. But something loosened. The grip of endless wakefulness. A fist clenched too long. Opened. And in that space, the silence returned. Not empty. But sacred. The next night, he came again. And the next. And each time, the melody found him more easily. He no longer searched for it. It came when he listened, not when he commanded. The advisors noticed a change. He spoke slower. Not from weariness, but from stillness. He looked at the stars again. Not to name them, but to greet them. The birds returned to the palace gardens. Even the water in the fountains seemed calmer. The kingdom did not know what had changed, but it felt lighter. And one night, many moons later, the king did not walk to the chamber of bells. He walked to his chambers. The fire was low. The moon watched quietly. And he, at last, lay down. Not to fight sleep, but to welcome it. And though his eyes remained open a little longer, his breath told another story. One of return. Of reunion. A whisper. Then a rhythm. Then a dream. The royal chambers were silent now. Not the silence of stone walls or heavy curtains muffling sound, but a deeper stillness. The hush of a world slowing down, the quiet that lives just before dreams begin. The fire had burned low. The air was cool, not cold. Time itself seemed to have curled into a slower rhythm. And within this hush, something in the king had changed. For countless nights, he had wandered in search of a way to defy sleep, to rise above the need to rest, chasing immortality in the echo of restless hours. But tonight, there was no more resistance, only surrender. He lay down, not out of defeat, but as one who has traveled far and finally remembers the way home. And when he closed his eyes, it was not to escape, but to arrive. At first, there was only darkness. Not frightening, not empty, but soft, like the inside of a velvet cloak. It welcomed him like an old friend. Then slowly, the shadows shifted. The air around him thickened, became a kind of presence. As if the world he entered was breathing too. Out of the hush came images. Not like visions forced upon him, but like memories rising gently from still water. Golden fields stretched beyond sight, bathed in the glow of twilight. Each blade of wheat swayed with the whisper of unseen wind. A rhythm older than words, older than kings. He walked, barefoot, the soil warm and familiar beneath his feet, not cold like marble, but soft and alive. Each step was slow. Each breath was full. And in this walking, there was no destination, only being. The stars above shimmered, but did not demand to be noticed. They blinked gently, like eyes half asleep, keeping watch over dreaming earth. There, ahead, a river, wide, slow, luminous. It moved like time itself, carrying no urgency, only presence. He knelt by the water's edge, trailing his fingers through its surface. It did not resist. It embraced. And in the ripple, he saw something unexpected, his own face. But younger. Not the face of a prince. Not the crown bearer, not the warrior. But the child. The boy before the world taught him what to chase. The boy was laughing. Not wildly, but freely. Barefoot and joyful, running through fields lit by 1,000 fireflies. Each glow a memory. Each flicker a forgotten dream. The king stood, and the boy turned. There was no fear between them. Only recognition. "Welcome back," the boy whispered, his voice soft as drifting snow. "I've been waiting." And so, they walked together. The boy and the man he became. Through the landscape of memory not yet lost. They crossed bridges made of moonlight. Sat beneath trees that sang lullabies in forgotten tongues. They watched clouds drift across painted skies, changing shape like thoughts that had no need for words. The king did not speak. He listened. And in that listening, he began to remember what silence could offer. They passed through forests where every leaf shimmered with dusk, not falling, just waiting. The air was scented with distant rain. A promise of cleansing, not sorrow. At one point, the boy stopped. He placed his small hand on the king's chest. "You forgot this," he said gently. And in that touch, the king felt something begin to glow. Not a flame, but a warmth. As if the sun had risen inside him. It was peace. Simple. Undemanding. The kind that does not shout, but hums quietly in the background of all things true. They sat beside a tree whose roots reached deep into the earth, its branches curled like arms in prayer. There, the king rested. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. And time, for a while, let go of him. No bells rang. No messengers arrived. No decisions waited to be made. Only the gentle rustle of grass. The rhythmic breathing of the world. For the first time in years, the king's mind grew quiet. The old thoughts, the fears, the burdens. They drifted like leaves on a stream, still there, but no longer clinging. He felt tears rise. Not from sadness, but from release. And the boy simply held his hand. They watched a sky turn from blue to gold to rose, then to silver once again. A cycle. Not an ending. When at last the boy stood, he did not say goodbye. He simply smiled. As if to say, "Now you remember." The king rose. His heart was light, his breath steady. No answers had been demanded. No mysteries solved. And yet, he had found something greater than knowledge. He had found rest. Not just for the body, but for the soul. When he opened his eyes, the first light of dawn was stretching across the sky. Not harsh, not loud, but like the hush between verses of a song. The kingdom beyond his chamber still lay quiet. The world had not changed, but something in him had. And as he sat in the soft glow of morning, he whispered, not aloud, but within, "Tonight, I will sleep again." And sleep, waiting patiently all these years, smiled back. The king awoke that morning not to the clamor of servants or the call of duty, but to a kind of stillness he did not yet understand. It was as if time itself had softened. Sunlight crept in through the tall windows like warm breath, filtered by gauzy curtains that swayed ever so slightly in the hush of dawn. The familiar ceiling above him, once a canvas of restless thoughts and imagined worries, now held no urgency. He did not rush to rise. Instead, he lay there, perfectly still, letting his breath settle into a quiet rhythm. Slow, steady, almost musical. The pillow beneath his head had never felt softer, nor the silence more sacred. There was a sense, faint but undeniable, that something within him had shifted. He rose eventually, not because he had to, but because the moment gently invited him forward. Slipping into simple robes, he stepped into a world newly hushed. The corridors of the palace echoed only with the sounds of soft wind through high windows, and the occasional coo of a distant dove. Rather than walk the halls of state, the king turned toward the gardens. They had once been vibrant with song and laughter, but over the years had grown quiet, almost forgotten, left to the rhythms of nature rather than the pruning of servants. Yet today, that felt right. He passed under arched trellises woven with jasmine and faded rose, their petals gently catching the morning sun. The air was laced with a perfume that didn't overwhelm, but rather unfolded slowly, like a memory. A breeze meandered through the leaves, rustling like pages of a book long closed. He wandered slowly, without destination. With each step, he felt the heaviness of his crown lessen, not from its weight, but from the stories it carried. The expectations, the sleeplessness, the idea that a king must always be awake, always alert, always ahead of tomorrow. In the heart of the garden, he came upon a place he had not visited in years. A small reflecting pool, round and still, surrounded by stones covered in moss. The surface of the water was like polished glass, reflecting the sky so perfectly that for a moment, he wasn't sure where the world above ended. And the water began. He sat beside it. No throne beneath him, no walls around him. Just the garden, the water, and the soft presence of his own breath. He did not try to think. He did not try to solve. He simply let go. And in that letting go, the visions began. They were not dreams, exactly. Not stories told or summoned. More like feelings wrapped in images, emotions speaking in color and shape. He saw a bloom unfold, a single flower rising from still soil, its petals the color of dusk. He reached out with his mind, not his hand, and touched it. It was a dream he had once held as a child, of sailing beyond the edge of the known world, where the stars hung low and spoke in songs. That dream had withered under years of battle maps and royal decrees. But now it opened again, not demanding action, only remembrance. More dreams bloomed around him. Some vibrant, pulsing with wonder. Others pale, fragile, the kind that had faded not because they weren't true, but because they were never given sunlight. He stayed there, surrounded by this garden of forgotten dreams. A child's wish to be held. A wanderer's longing to be lost. A painter's yearning for a color only imagined. They were not all his. Some were inherited, passed down in silence. Others belonged to those long gone, dreams that had waited generations to be seen. The garden was quiet, but alive. Not with words, but with presence. He lay back on the grass, feeling the cool earth beneath his spine, the warmth of the sun on his face. Above him, branches swayed in the breeze, casting shifting shadows like soft lullabies. And then came the voice. Not a voice outside him, but one deep within. It said, "You do not need to carry everything. You do not need to remember every answer. It is safe to rest." Tears welled behind his eyes, not from sadness, but from a kind of relief so deep it had no name. He had forgotten what it meant to feel safe in the arms of the world, to be held by something greater than himself. He closed his eyes, and in the darkness behind his lids, stars bloomed. Not like the stars of the sky, distant and cold, but warm, close, intimate. Each one a lullaby, a whispered promise. You are enough. You are held. You may sleep. He did not dream of palaces or glory. He dreamt of quiet rivers, of hands held in silence, of long walks with no need for destination. Time melted, and with it, so did the ache in his chest. He awoke not to sound, but to stillness. The garden glowed in the golden hush of late afternoon. He sat up slowly, like one returning from a far shore. Birdsong traced the edges of the breeze. The pool still shimmered. But now, instead of a mirror of his face, he saw only sky. Endless, open, forgiving sky. He stood. But he did not rush. He bowed to the garden, to the pool, to the dreams. And he walked back toward the palace. Not to rule. Not to fight. But simply to be. The palace walls no longer felt like a cage, but a home. A place where waking and dreaming danced together, each step in rhythm with the other. That night, he did not fear the moment when his eyes would close. He welcomed it. He lay down as the stars climbed over the horizon, their light soft as breath. His chamber was quiet, but no longer empty. It held peace. And scent of the jasmine still lingered on his robes. As he drifted, he whispered not to the world, but to himself, "Tonight, I will not chase rest. I will receive it. Sleep is not a stranger. It is my oldest friend." And as the hush of night deepened, sleep came. Not like a thief, or a conqueror, but like a gardener, cradling him gently back to the soil of dreams. Next evening, when the horizon blurred between color and shadow, and the breeze hummed a song only the trees could understand, the king stepped beyond the gates of his palace. Not as a sovereign, not as a man weighed by robes or crown, but as a soul in search of silence. His footsteps were slow, not from fatigue, but from listening. To the hush between each breath, to the earth beneath him, warm and breathing. Above, the sky turned to ink, but not black. Rather the deep indigo of water remembered in dreams. The stars did not rush to appear. They came slowly, like friends arriving late to a quiet gathering, each taking its place with gentle purpose. A narrow path wound its way into a part of the land untouched by memory, where no soldier marched, no flag flew, no name had ever been carved into stone. And along that quiet path, he felt something unfamiliar, not fear, not hope, but permission. Permission to not know. The forest met him like a breath long held. Branches bowed slightly, not in greeting, but in shared understanding. And at its edge, where the trees grew soft and silver from the moonlight, he saw her. She sat upon a low stone wrapped in moss, surrounded by the hush of night and the slow spin of stars. Her robe was neither black nor white, but woven from threads that shimmered. Silver, smoke, dusk, and the faint pink of memory. In front of her stood a loom. Ancient, silent, breathing like a sleeping animal. It wasn't made of wood or iron, but of something older, maybe wind, maybe song. She was not young. She was not old. She was simply timeless. The way a lullaby is, or a scent from childhood you forgot you loved. The king stepped forward. "Who are you?" he asked, though not with suspicion. His voice was the voice of a child, asking a question he already knew the answer to, but needed to hear it said aloud. The woman looked up, slowly. Her eyes were pale and vast, like moonlit lakes. "I am the weaver," she said. Her hands moved in rhythm. The loom clicked gently, like a heartbeat at rest. "I weave what is lost," she said. "I mend what has unraveled in silence." The king stepped closer. "I have forgotten how to sleep," he whispered. The weaver nodded. "I know." Silence followed, but it was not a pause. It was part of the weaving. He sat beside her. No command. No ceremony. He simply folded his legs and watched. Thread by thread, her hands pulled strands from the air. Soft, glowing, tender. And placed them into the tapestry. The threads glimmered, some like stardust, some like laughter. Others pulsed with sorrow, but even those did not seem dangerous. Just human. Where do the threads come from? The king asked softly. The weaver didn't stop. She nodded upward. They come from the sky, from the dreams of those who no longer remember how to dream, from the breath of sleeping trees, from lullabies never sung, and from stories abandoned before they could end. She pointed to a dark blue thread that shimmered like twilight on water. This one came from a boy who once dreamed he could fly, but forgot it when he learned to walk with pride. She placed it beside a silver thread, and the two glowed warmer when joined. The king closed his eyes for a moment. In that flicker of darkness, he saw it. A memory not of a place, but of a feeling, being held, being weightless, the sound of someone humming. Without words, without worry. The weaver smiled, but said nothing. You've woven these for others? He asked. Yes. And for no one. The night doesn't ask who deserves it. It simply arrives. The king looked at the pattern. It was not symmetrical, not planned, but it made sense. Like a dream you forget upon waking, yet whose emotion lingers all day. What happens to these tapestries? He asked. The weaver slowed her hands. They dissolve into sleep. They slip into dreams. They become the gentle current that carries a tired mind away. She added a new thread, soft, warm, golden. This one, she whispered, was from you. The king blinked. From me. You lost it long ago, she said. But it waited. Dreams are patient. He looked down at the thread. It shimmered like forgiveness. It smelled of sandalwood and rain. She handed it to him. Keep it, she said. It is your night. He held it carefully, as though it might vanish with breath. Can I take it with me? He asked. The weaver didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked into his eyes, with the kind of softness that lives in grandmothers and old songs. You already have, she said. The forest grew quieter. Even the trees seemed to lean inward. The loom slowed. The stars brightened. And the king, now holding a piece of his own night, stood and bowed. Not as a king, but as a man returning to himself. He walked back without hurry. The moon lit his way, but it didn't need to. His feet knew the path, as though he'd walked it long before, in some forgotten chapter of sleep. Back at the palace, his chamber was not grand. It was simply still. He removed the crown without thought. Set it down like setting down a memory. He placed the thread beneath his pillow. And that night, he did not chase sleep. He did not wait for it like a guard on watch. He simply rested, breathed, let the hum of old lullabies fill the quiet space behind his eyes. He let the dark come to him, like an ocean that needs no invitation. The thread pulsed gently, a heartbeat of its own. And somewhere, in a forest that may or may not exist, a loom slowed its rhythm. As the weaver smiled, her work for the night was done. The night that followed was softer than the ones before. The stars arrived earlier, as though they had been waiting, and the wind that drifted through the palace gates carried no urgency. Only hush. The king walked again, not as a ruler, not even as a man in search of answers, but as a soul following something it could not name. He passed through the stone courtyards, past fountains that murmured old songs in their sleep, beneath balconies where ivy curled like forgotten stories. And then, beyond the garden walls. Walls no one remembered building. He saw it. A gate. Iron, worn, barely clinging to its hinges. Beyond it, a garden. Or perhaps something older than a garden. Something that had been waiting long before the palace had been dreamed of. The king stepped through. The air inside was different. Warmer. Still. As though time had curled up here like a cat, and fallen fast asleep. The trees were tall, with bark the color of burnt sugar and twilight. Their leaves shimmered, not with dew, but with memory. And beneath the trees, the ground was soft. A mossy hush beneath his feet. He walked slowly. Every step felt like a return, though he couldn't remember ever being here. The scent in the air was strange, but gentle, figs warmed by sunless light, cedar soaked in time, and something sweet. Like honey forgotten at the back of a childhood cupboard. And more than anything, it smelled like sleep. Not the sleep that follows exhaustion, but the kind that comes when nothing is chasing you anymore. The kind that holds you. Fruit hung from the trees. Round, silver-tinted, glowing softly like moons dreaming behind clouds. He reached for one. It pulsed in his hand. Not with light, but with breath. As if it were alive, and glad to be held. Without knowing why, he took a bite. It tasted like quiet. Like the moment after laughter fades, or the hush between notes in a lullaby. With each bite, something unfurled inside him. He saw a memory. But not a memory of an event. A feeling. Sunlight on bare feet. The sound of his sister's laughter as they climbed trees barefoot. A low voice, maybe his father's. Telling a story under a blanket of stars. And somewhere, a song. No words. Just humming. Warm. Endless. He sat beneath the tree. Not from weariness, but because the earth invited him to. He didn't think. Didn't plan. Didn't reach for understanding. He simply sat a day. And slowly, the garden around him breathed. The leaves no longer rustled. They sighed. The trees leaned inward, not closing, but listening. The fruit glowed dimmer, like lanterns letting go of the day. His eyes drifted closed. Not in sleep. Not yet. But in something close. The space before sleep. The warm edge of it. And in that space, he saw a child running barefoot between the trees. Dark curls bouncing. Laughing with his whole body. The child turned. And the king saw himself. Not as he was, but as he had been. Before the weight of things. Before titles. Before forgetting. He didn't reach for the child. He didn't have to. They simply looked at one another. And that was enough. A breeze moved through the garden, carrying nothing but presence. And then the child turned, and ran deeper into the trees, still laughing. Not away, but onward. The king opened his eyes. The tree was still there. So was the hush. So was the thread of quiet holding the air together. And in his lap, another fruit. This one golden. Not glowing. But warm. He held it, not to eat, but to keep. As one might keep a name. Once forgotten. And now remembered. He stood. And though his body hadn't moved much, something within him had traveled far. He bowed to the tree. To the garden. To the part of himself that had waited here patiently. For years, maybe lifetimes. And the garden, in its silence, bowed back. Not visibly, but in presence. In stillness. In knowing. He walked back to the palace the same way he had come. Slowly, without looking over his shoulder. The iron gate faded behind him, like a dream that had shared all it needed to share. And in his pocket, the golden fruit, still warm, still breathing. When he returned to his chambers, he did not close the window. He let the wind move freely through. He let the stars in. He removed his crown, not with formality, but with familiarity, as one might remove a coat. After a long, cold day, he set the fruit by his bedside, placed his hand on it gently, and lay down. He did not wait for sleep. He did not command it. He did not coax it like a hesitant guest. He simply let go. Let the weight settle where it would. Let his breath return to its slow, early rhythm. And in that space, the space between thought and dream, the garden waited for him again, not to show him something new, but to remind him what he already knew, that rest is not earned, nor taken. It is returned to, like a home. Somewhere beyond the walls, a single silver fruit fell gently into the grass, without sound, without urgency. And in that moment, beneath layers of moonlight and memory, a king slept. Not because he had solved a mystery, not because the world was at peace, but because he had remembered how. The next night, as silence gently returned to the palace and the stars resumed their quiet watch, the king remained by the window, unmoving. He did not walk through the halls. He did not wander through moonlit orchards. He did not pass between the tall shadows of cypress trees, nor hear the quiet sigh of fountains echoing in the courtyards. No footsteps sounded down marble corridors. No lanterns were lit. No gates opened. Instead, he turned inward. He stepped, not through doors, but through the soft chambers of his own being. With each breath, he moved further in, as if walking down a spiral staircase of silence, that led not to a room, but to a remembering. He sat on the floor of his sleeping chamber, his robes folded neatly beside him, his crown set far from reach. There was no need for gold tonight. No need for symbols or signs. Just breath. Just stillness. The moonlight spread across the stone floor, gathering softly around him like water, cool and quiet. It touched his face, his shoulders, and the open palms resting on his knees, as if saying, "You have arrived." Outside, the wind held its breath. Inside, everything waited. But not impatiently. Like a room that had been closed for years, yet never truly empty. A chamber within the self, that waits only to be noticed again. There, in that great silence, he heard it. Not a sound, not a voice, but something just beneath both. A kind of presence. Something he hadn't felt in a long time. It was like the hush that comes after sorrow has passed, but before words return. It was the silent voice. Not speaking, not pleading, simply being. Somewhere deep in the caverns of his soul, beyond duty, beyond fear, beyond the endless noise of ruling, this quiet voice had waited. It didn't ask for anything. It didn't need attention. But it was there. Constant, ancient, and tender. The king closed his eyes. And what rose within him was not memory, but feeling. A soft ache behind his ribs. A pressure in his throat. A warmth in his eyes. He didn't resist it. He didn't analyze or explain. He simply allowed it. Like allowing rain to fall, or night to come. Then, without sound, the voice seemed to breathe one simple phrase through him: "You are tired." Not just tired in body. Not only tired of war or ruling, but tired in the deep, ancient way. A soul can be tired. Tired of pretending. Tired of always holding it all. Tired of forgetting what it means to rest. Without guilt. And when he heard it, he didn't fight it. He let the truth settle. He let the ache unfold. He remembered things. Not scenes, but sensations. The hush of childhood evenings, when he'd lie awake waiting for a door to creak open, for someone to come, for a voice to say, "It's all right now." But no one had come. Not because they didn't care, but because they didn't know how. And so he learned to quiet himself, to silence fear, to hold himself upright, even in his sleep. The silent voice stayed beside him, not speaking, not solving, just staying. And in that sacred company, the king began to cry. Not loudly, not tragically, but gently. Like water finding its way through cracks in old stone. Tears that had waited decades. Tears that carried no anger. Only softness. Only surrender. He didn't rush it. He didn't wipe them away. He let them fall. Each one a drop of memory. A thread of grief. A seed of healing. And when the tears were done, he did not feel broken. He felt lighter, as if something ancient had been unfastened. From the deepest folds of him. Minutes passed. Or hours. It no longer mattered. The moonlight shifted across the room, drawing quiet patterns on the stone. A breeze returned. Gentle, like breath. It brushed against his skin, carrying with it the scent of night jasmine. And open sky. And into that silence, the king whispered. Not to anyone, but just to the space around him, "I want to sleep again. Truly sleep. Not just close my eyes, but return." Return to what? To when? Not to a time, but to a state. A place within himself. Where rest was not earned, but natural. Where safety did not need proving. Where silence was not emptiness, but presence. The silent voice did not reply. It didn't need to. Because the moment he spoke those words, he realized something had changed. The stillness inside him had grown wide enough to carry that longing. He placed his hand over his chest. Not in oath, but in acknowledgement. Of pain. Of survival. Of the quiet parts of himself that had waited so long to be heard. Then, softly, he stood. Each movement unhurried. Like the petals of a night-blooming flower. Responding to moonlight. He walked toward the bed. Not as a ruler, but as a soul returned. He lay down. Not out of exhaustion, but out of readiness. The blankets folded over him like water. The pillow cradled the back of his head, and the wind through the window spoke nothing. But it understood. He turned toward the open air. His eyes heavy. His breath slow. And he smiled. Not because something grand had happened, but because he had remembered something small and true. That rest is not weakness. That stillness is not failure. That sleep is sacred. His mind did not rush ahead. His heart did not argue. No thoughts arrived. Only a hush. A soft internal quiet. That spread outward. Like ink in water. The silent voice merged with the rhythm of his breath. Not gone, but absorbed. Not external, but internal once more. And as sleep gathered around him, as if drawing a great velvet curtain, Across the edges of his waking mind, he felt himself drifting. Downward, inward, homeward, toward a dreamless rest, where nothing needed to be done, and nothing needed to be said. In that final moment before crossing into sleep, he did not think of kingship. He did not think of gardens. He did not think at all. He simply was. And in that presence, he exhaled. Soft, steady, free. Sleep returned. And this time, he welcomed it. Not like a stranger, but like an old friend, who had never truly left. Just waited, until he was ready. It was said that far in the east, beyond the last edge of the map, there stood a tree that grew in both directions. Its branches rising toward the stars, and its roots falling into dreams. The king had heard of it only once, in a forgotten scroll, buried beneath state records and war plans. A single line, written in old ink: "He who cannot sleep must travel to where time sleeps." Now, the phrase echoed within him, not as a command, but as a gentle suggestion. Like the hum of a lullaby not yet sung. He rose at dawn, not hurried, not with grand gestures, but as someone who knew that the journey had already begun within him. He did not dress in royal robes. He wore soft linen, wrapped in wool, simple as a shepherd. He carried no sword, no map, no guards. Only a walking staff carved from olive wood. The road was long. Not in distance, but in time. The days passed slowly, like syrup in cold air. Villages came and went, faces blurred with kindness, clouds drifted above, and the king walked. With every step, he remembered less. Not out of forgetfulness, but from release. He no longer carried the weight of decrees, or the burden of being seen. He was simply a man, with tired eyes, and a quiet hope. At twilight of the seventh day, he reached a wide plain of silver grasses. No birds, no wind, just a hush. The kind that makes even thought seem too loud. And in the center of that plain stood a single tree. It was taller than any tower, but its presence was not imposing. It felt timeless, like it had grown from the first breath of the world, and would still be there after the last. He stepped toward it, slowly. The grass made no sound beneath him. The tree's bark shimmered faintly, not with gold, but with age. Its roots were deep and wide, as if they held forgotten dreams, buried by centuries of unspoken wishes. He placed a hand on its trunk. It was warm. And then he closed his eyes. He did not fall asleep. Not yet. But he entered something deeper than silence. He stood at the edge of time. Not as a king. Not as a seeker. Just as a soul. Tired of holding itself together. In this space, memories rose. But they came not in images, but in feelings. He felt his mother's touch. From a night he could no longer name. He felt the longing of the queen he had pushed away. He felt the fear of the little boy, who once thought love must be earned. And he let it all wash over him, like waves that do not drown, but cleanse. Somewhere in the branches above, a bird began to sing. Not with melody, but with rhythm. Like breath. Like the ocean. Like sleep. And within that sound, the king finally saw it. Time was not a line. It was a pool. Still. Reflective. Waiting. He stepped into it. Not with his feet, but with his soul. And as he did, he was surrounded by dreams. Not his own, but of all who had ever wandered here. A child dreaming of snow. A woman dreaming of her lost brother. An old man dreaming of forgiveness. They floated past him, gentle as smoke, never touching, but always near. He was not afraid. Because now, he knew, dreams are not escapes. They are returns. In the center of this dream space, he found a shape. Small. Soft. Breathing. It was him. But not the king. Not the ruler. It was the child. The boy before the crown. The boy before the forgetting. The boy who had once sung himself to sleep. The king knelt. He did not speak. He just listened. And the boy began to hum. It was not a song. It was not even a tune. It was feeling, made sound. The king joined in, not with voice, but with presence. And together, they made a sound so quiet, so sacred, that even the stars above paused. Time folded inward. The grasses bowed. The tree shimmered brighter. And in that moment, that still, eternal moment, the king remembered completely how to sleep. He opened his eyes. Night had fallen. But not the cold kind. This was the kind of night that holds you, softly, lovingly. He lay down beneath the tree. No thoughts. No names. Just the hum still echoing in his chest. And he slept. Not out of exhaustion. But out of return. He woke not with a jolt, not with a gasp, but like a feather settling on earth. The morning was pale, and soft like the breath of a child. The silver grasses whispered. The tree stood beside him, quiet and unwavering, its presence now a part of him. The king sat up, not as one who had overslept, but as one newly born into slowness. His eyes opened not to the world, but to himself. There was no need to speak. No grand insight. No prophecy to recite. Only breath, only heartbeat, only the feeling of being enough. And perhaps that was the truth he had lost. In his long war against sleep. Not the mysteries of time, or the secrets of dreams, but the simple knowing that rest is sacred, and being is already whole. He stood. The sky held a silver blue, not yet day, not quite night. The in-between place, where nothing is demanded, and everything is possible. The king took one final look at the tree. He bowed, not as a king, but as a guest who had been allowed to remember. Then he walked. Not quickly. Not slowly. Just rightly. The road home was not the same road he had taken. Not because the land had changed, but because he had. Villages he passed through smiled without expectation. Children waved without fear. A baker gave him warm bread. And asked no questions. The king thanked him. As a traveler would. With eyes that carried something ancient and soft. Days passed, but he no longer counted them. He did not rush to return. Because he was not returning to a throne, or to a crown, but to the present moment. Again and again. By the time the walls of the capital appeared, he felt no fear. No anxiety about how he would be received, or what judgments might await. Because he no longer needed to be anyone. He had remembered how to be. They did not recognize him at first. His beard had grown. His eyes had softened. He wore no robe, no jewels, no sign of royalty. But when he smiled, somehow, they knew. One by one, they came. Servants, scribes, soldiers. Not to bow, but to see him. And when they did, something in their posture changed. Not out of obedience, but relief. As if his return meant they could also put something down. He did not speak to the court. There was no proclamation. Only one quiet message, spoken in the Hall of Winds, where every voice echoes. He said, "From now on, let there be one law above all others, that no man, woman, or child shall be denied their rest." There was no applause, only silence. And in that silence, he knew the message had landed, exactly where it was needed. That night, he sat beneath the olive tree in the palace garden, a place he had once passed, without ever seeing. The birds were quiet. The stars listened. And then, a small sound, a child's hum. The same melody that had come from the boy at the tree. His younger self, perhaps, or someone else entirely. He followed the sound. To a doorway. To a nursery. To a child held gently in a nursemaid's arms. The hum continued. The child slept. He stood in the doorway, watching. Not as a ruler. Not even as a man. Just as a witness. To the sacred simplicity of sleep. The nurse turned, startled for a moment, then softened. She nodded, as if to say, "You remember." He nodded back. From that night onward, he walked the city not as a sovereign, but as a quiet keeper of sleep. He restored the old bathhouses. He built sanctuaries of stillness. In the noisiest corners of the city, he removed bells from towers, and replaced them with chimes that sang only when the wind chose to sing. He encouraged storytelling at dusk, and silence after supper. And slowly, a kingdom remembered what it had forgotten, that sleep is not idleness. It is returning to source. Years passed. The king grew older. His beard silvered. His steps slowed. But his eyes grew younger. He became known not for his wars, nor for his decrees, but for something rarer, for being the king who once forgot sleep. And then taught everyone how to remember it. And when, at last, his time came to rest for the final time, he did not resist. He lay upon soft earth, under the same olive tree, and closed his eyes. There was no fear. No unfinished business. Only breath. Only silence. Only return. And as he drifted, not away, but deeper, a lullaby rose on the wind, carried across rooftops, through streets and gardens, to the beds of children and elders alike. The lullaby did not have words, only meaning. And the whole kingdom, that night, slept like it had not slept in 1,000 years. Our story has come to an end. Now, you're in a place where there are no questions, no movements, only sleep. If you can still hear my voice, you're standing at the threshold. But soon, everything will grow still. Good night, and the gentlest dreams.